Welcome and welcome back to the deep dive. Today we've got quite a varied stack of sources. We're going from the complexities of domestic threat assessment, really tricky stuff, all the way to, well, historical firsts in space, and even the economics of 1970s nostalgia.
Yeah, it's a real mix. And our goal, as always, is to try and synthesize these sometimes competing narratives for you,
Yeah.
especially the data around political violence, find those common threads. We're really looking for the so what behind the headlines.
Okay, let's dive right in then. That data on political violence in the U.S., the conversation's definitely been amplified lately, hasn't it? Especially after that assassination of Charlie Kirk.
It really has. And that event immediately fed into the narrative from the Trump administration that, quote, radical left political violence has hurt too many innocent people.
Hmm.
But, to really understand that claim, you have to look at the longer-term context.
Right. And historically, that context, it's shown a different pattern, hasn't it? For years, federal authorities, non-governmental researchers, they've pretty consistently identified the far right as the most, well, lethal and persistent threat domestically. We all know the terrible examples.
Yeah.
Charleston in 2015, El Paso 2019, Buffalo 2022, Pittsburgh 2018.
That's the baseline, exactly. But then you get new short-term data. And this controversial report came out from CSIS, the Center for Strategic and Intellectual Studies. It suggested a huge, almost immediate reversal just in the first half of 2025.
A reversal. Okay, what exactly did CSIS find in that, 6-month window that seems so different from the long-term trend?
So they looked at incidents between January 1st and July 4th, 2025, and they coded 5 incidents as left-wing terrorist plots or attacks,
Wow.
compared to only 1 coded as right-wing. So yeah, if you just look at that tiny snapshot, it looks like the trend completely flipped, which of course is a major talking point for people wanting to focus on left-wing threats.
But 5 incidents? The research community sounds really skeptical about drawing big conclusions from that. Why the pushback?
Well, because 5 is just statistically tiny in this field, really is.
Yeah.
One co-author from the Institute for Countering Digital Extremism basically said, look, 5 is a negligible number for robust conclusions. If you look back, say, to the late 90s, the right wing averaged something like 12 major incidents every 6 months. So compared to that historical rate, 5 incidents from the left in 6 months. This is actually pretty small, statistically speaking.
Okay, so maybe the data isn't showing a huge surge on the left as much as maybe a sharp drop on the right, which then makes you ask, well, why would right-wing activity decline so fast?
Precisely. And the CSIS co-author, Daniel Byman, he actually pointed that out. He said the most significant finding might not be the 5 on the left, but the really sharp decline in right-wing attacks. Now, here's a theory he floated, and it's worth thinking about carefully. He speculated the drop might be because the Trump administration has put into action some policy goals, like increased immigration enforcement, things that might have previously motivated violence on the right.
Wait, hold on. So the idea is that violence decreases when some extremist demands are met through policy. That sounds potentially quite concerning. Is there any chance the decline is just, better policing targeting those groups?
That's the kind of nuance this short-term data just can't give us, unfortunately. But it really highlights the huge difficulty researchers face here, which brings us right to the core issue, how subjective this whole field is. Researchers basically have to build their own databases and decide how to code events using their own criteria. There's no single universal standard.
Okay, let's get specific then. Why is that methodological difference so controversial? What was the key thing CSIS focused on?
CSIS decided to focus very narrowly on risk of life. So the intent had to be specifically to harm or kill people. And this choice, well, it caused a bit of a firestorm because of what it excluded. Things like, say, drawing swastikas on a synagogue, or arson attacks on Tesla cars. Clearly political acts against civilian targets. They were excluded if there wasn't that explicit intent to kill individuals right there and then.
But they did include setting fire to, 11 NYPD cars?
They did, yeah. Because that act, they argued, carried an inherent risk to police officers, firefighters, maybe bystanders. So it meant the risk of life test.
And this contrast just perfectly shows the problem, right? One researcher might absolutely call an attack on property for political reasons terrorism. Another, using the strict risk of life rule, might not. And both could be seen as legitimate criteria.
And even really high-profile events are hard to pin down. Byman at CSIS sees the Kirk assassination as a very obvious example of left-wing terrorism, even though it was outside their study period. But other researchers are saying, hang on, it's too soon to code that definitively. We need more information on motive. It really feels like the simple left-right framework is just crumbling under the weight of how threats actually look today. Remember former FBI Director Wray used that term, salad bar extremism?
Salad bar extremism, right? That's the idea that people are just picking and choosing different bits from various radical ideologies, isn't it? It's not one single coherent belief system anymore, which must make it way harder to track using traditional political labels.
Exactly. It's messy. And the FBI even had to create a whole new category to try and cover the gaps. Nihilistic violent extremism. That's for violence that doesn't seem to have any clear political ideology behind it, just sort of general resentment or meaninglessness. The framework is constantly trying to catch up.
Something else that's interesting here is the shift in tactics you mentioned, the violence getting more personal. What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, that's a key observation from the sources. The sort of template used to be the mass casualty event. Think Oklahoma City bombing, 1995, 168 people killed. Horrific scale. Now, even when attackers seem to have the opportunity for a higher body count, the attacks are often much more limited, maybe focused on specific symbolic targets, like the murders at the D.C. Capitol Jewish Museum. The suspect killed 2 people in the street, but then stopped, apparently, even though they might have had the means to do more harm. The focus seems to shift from just maximizing casualties to making a very specific, maybe targeted statement.
And the policy impact of all this is huge, right? There are real concerns the administration is focusing resources too narrowly, maybe going after anti-fascist groups while overlooking other data points, and underscored by cutting the funding for that University of Maryland public data project, citing biased data. That seems pretty significant.
It really is. When the government starts restricting public access to threat data, and policy seems driven more by politically useful narratives than balanced research, well, it potentially harms the effectiveness of counterterrorism efforts. You need accurate, transparent data for law enforcement to allocate resources properly and protect people.
That whole discussion really shows how subjective data can potentially misalign institutional resources. Let's pivot now to a story where competence drove huge institutional change. NASA's astronaut class of 1978.
Yes, Group 8, or the 35 new guys, the TFNGs as they were nicknamed. This wasn't just hiring more people, it was genuinely revolutionary for NASA. They decided to basically double the size of the active astronaut corps. They chose 35 candidates, 15 were traditional pilots, but 20 were mission specialists.
And that mission specialist role, that was the key to opening things up for diversity, right? How did that work?
It was absolutely crucial because it removed the strict requirement for high-performance military pilot experience. And just like that, overnight, this one class brought in 6 white women people like Sally Ride, Judy Resnick, Kathy Sullivan, names we know well now, and 4 men of color, 3 African-American men, 1 Asian-American man. This single group really paved the way culturally for women and minorities in all of the future astronaut classes.
It's fascinating, though, how the media reacted immediately. The sources say reporters just swarmed the 10 interesting ones, the women and minority men, and the coverage showed some intense bias.
Oh, absolutely. The media frenzy was fixated on things like the women's appearance, their size, their weight, were they married, what clothes were they wearing, details that were just completely absent in stories about the male astronauts. It was much less about their PhDs or their skills and more about how they fit or didn't fit, some kind of stereotype.
And inside NASA, the old guard, the veteran astronauts, mostly white military pilots from the Apollo days, they were skeptical.
Heavily skeptical, yeah. The sources say they kept their distance initially. They were worried these non-pilots would sort of dilute the right stuff image, maybe take flight slots away from them. There was real friction.
So the TFNGs had to prove themselves not just technically, but culturally, too.
Definitely. Within an organization really steeped in that military test pilot culture. And they succeeded incredibly well. That class went on to serve on 50 shuttle missions. They logged nearly 1,000 days in space combined by the year 2000. Their competence in the end was the best argument against that initial bias.
Still, those anecdotes about how unprepared NASA was institutionally, they're pretty jarring. Ready for complex rockets, but not for, say, women needing a locker room.
That's the real tension, isn't it? They could handle orbital mechanics, but missed basic stuff. No women's locker room or restroom in the gym initially. When they handed out athletic gear, they had jive straps for the men, but apparently no one thought about sports bras for the women. These small, practical things, they speak volumes about the unconscious bias baked into the system back then.
And that bias didn't stop at the Johnson Space Center gates, did it?
No, it followed them out.
Yeah.
Think about Rhea Seddon. She's a medical doctor and an astronaut, right? Yet she still needed her father to co-sign a loan for her condo. Or Anna Fisher being told flat out by a department chair that women just didn't belong in surgery. These were people at the absolute peak of their fields, still hitting these basic societal and bureaucratic walls just because of their gender.
The sources mention they tried to just blend in at first, wearing the same khaki pants and polo shirts as the men, just wanting to be seen as astronauts.
Yeah, their strategy wasn't really to fight the culture head-on, initially anyway. It was about mastering the job. And by just consistently being excellent, they essentially forced the institution to adapt to them. It shows how sometimes just quiet, persistent competence can dismantle really entrenched biases over time.
That's a powerful story of persistence. Okay, let's shift gears again. Time for our rapid-fire round of global and cultural insights. Starting with Sudan. Some very worrying news from Darfur.
Extremely worrying. After 2 years of this awful conflict, the paramilitary group, the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, they've claimed control of el-Fasher. This was the last major city in the entire Darfur region that wasn't under their control. So it's a huge strategic game for them in the civil war.
And the implications for the people there.
Immediate and severe. At least something like 260,000 civilians basically cut off, trapped without aid in a really volatile area. The UN is already warning about the potential for massacres, particularly targeting non-Arab communities. It's a major humanitarian crisis point needing urgent attention.
Okay, shifting to some high-stakes political drama now. In Turkey, Istanbul's mayor, Ekrem İmamoğlu, he's a major rival to President Erdogan, is facing new serious charges.
That's right. İmamoğlu, who's from the main opposition party, the CHP, is now facing espionage charges. They stem from alleged links between his campaign team and an intelligence agent who was arrested. Now, critics are saying this is pretty clearly a political tactic, using the legal system to crack down on the opposition. Especially since the CHP did well in recent local elections, it keeps a powerful rival bogged down in court instead of campaigning.
From high-stakes politics to digital privacy, Apple Maps in iOS 26 has this new feature, Visited Places. Automatic location tracking always makes people nervous, but the way they've done it seems thoughtful.
Yeah, the privacy aspect is key here. So Visited Places automatically log spots where you've stopped for a noticeable amount of time. Useful for remembering trips or sharing tips. But, and this is the important bit, the data is end-to-end encrypted.
Meaning not even Apple can see your location history.
Correct. They can't access it. And you, the user, control how long it's kept, 3 months, a year, or forever. It's actually a pretty good example of building privacy into a potentially invasive feature right from the start, balancing the utility with user control.
Okay, moving from high-tech tracking to some decidedly low-tech deception. Art forgery. German police busted an international ring.
Yeah, quite a story. This ring, apparently led by a 77-year-old German man, was trying to offload fake masterpieces. We're talking supposed Picassos, Rembrandts, Frida Kahlos, for tens of millions of dollars. But what's really kind of amazing is the sheer audacity of it all.
Give us the best example of that audacity.
Okay, get this. They tried to sell a copy of Rembrandt's famous painting, The Syndics, the group portrait. They tried to sell a copy for $150 million. The only problem is the actual original painting, the Stalmeesters, is hanging right now on public display in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. Trying to sell a fake of a painting that's currently in a major museum, that takes some serious nerve. Spectacular fraud, really.
Wow. That is bold. Okay, finally, let's look at some low-stakes economics, but interesting culturally. Pizza Hut, struggling in the UK, closing half their restaurants.
Yeah, this one's a fascinating little window into changing tastes, isn't it? For older generations, maybe people who grew up in the 80s or 90s, Pizza Hut was this big family treat, the destination for birthday parties, and it was all about those iconic things. The all-you-can-eat buffet, the salad bar with like everything on it. Felt like a fun, maybe even slightly upscale family event.
But that exact history, that nostalgia, that's actually hurting them now with younger people.
It seems so. Younger consumers, say people in their 20s, they apparently look at those very same elements, the buffet, the salad bar, they see them as negatives. Their perception is that it's maybe cheapening on quality, not fresh. So the brand's strongest nostalgic points have become turnoffs for the current generation.
What a range we've covered today.
We really have. From the intense difficulty and subjectivity in tracking domestic threats, to the incredible persistence needed by those first diverse astronauts breaking down barriers, and then all these intersections of global politics, tech, and even, well, pizza buffets.
So, what's the final thought to leave you with today? We heard that intelligence agencies sometimes cut funding for public data, citing biased practices. But we also saw just how subjective defining political violence really is.
Well,
If the actual numbers of left wing versus right wing incidents can swing wildly depending on which legitimate criteria a researcher uses, like focusing strictly on risk of life versus broader political intent, what does that really mean for law enforcement and intelligence agencies trying to figure out where to put their resources to actually protect people? Is the core problem the violence itself, or is it maybe the frameworks we're using to try and measure and understand it? Something to think about until our next deep dive.